belief because they've literally seen, like God reminds them at one point, I don't think I'll read it today, but he reminds them of like, hey, can you tell me another God that has acted how I've acted? Can you point out a God that has come down and pulled a nation out from another nation and made them his people and destroyed what they had by his force? And like, basically, can you tell me a God that's physically intervened in their life? Point that out. And they're like, no, we can't do it. And still he has to say, don't serve the other gods. Why is there a pull to do that? It is there throughout the rest of their existence, basically, which is remarkable, but I think understandable, because I think we all still do this to a little bit of an extent. We're going to see a little bit later on here that their answer to all of this is, yeah, we're going to do that. We've got this. And we kind of do that. I kind of do that, to some extent. I'll come to church on Sunday and be like, yes, this is my God. And then you leave, or I leave, people leave, and you've said this is my God, but then how you live throughout the week, it's like, well, money kind of takes the place of God at some point. You're more worshiping that. You're trying to get that fulfillment of that instant gratification of what money can bring, or friends. People chase after that. There's like the God of social media that people will worship a lot now. Try and get that approval. Put all their time and energy and thoughts and things and what they're going to post next. Put all your time and energy into what you're going to do for your job, and then God kind of just slides back a little bit. And so is he the God you're worshiping? Or are you chasing after false gods? Am I chasing after false gods as the people of Israel were warned not to do over and over again? We're going to see that in a little bit. So it's understandable. I think of the song, it's one of my favorite hymns. Consider this my official request to put it into a song up here sometime, but you use the platform, right? I'm here, might as well do it. Come thou fount of every blessing. It's an old song. I always love singing songs that people that have been dead for like 100 years sang. It's fun. It's a connection. But there's a line in that song that it always resonates with me, where he says, "Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love." And one of the reasons I love it is because you look at the story of the people in Exodus and then the people throughout the history of the nation, all the way up to Jesus' time, through early Christianity, to the guy, Robert Robinson, that wrote that song or something like that. The guy that wrote that song all the way through our day, and it's the same inclination. We're prone to wander, and we still feel it. There's something about that I would say comforting to me, that we still haven't got it right yet. I don't know why that's comforting, but it is. So, we have a nation that's prone to wander. We have a God that's saying, don't wander. You serve me. Not just don't bow down to the altars or don't bow down to the false gods, but he says you utterly destroy them. Where they have something set up, get rid of it. We don't want to see it. Which, again, he has said several times in the giving of the Ten Commandments and the verses after. Like the first commandment is what? No other gods. Don't do that. And he keeps going. Don't do that. One of the reasons, too, is that he knows where they came out of. Like God knows where they've come from in the culture of Egypt and where they've spent their entire existence in a society that has gods for everything. It's very tempting to be like, well, we worship this god for fertility back in Egypt. Maybe we need to go there. Or this god was for our crops. Like maybe we should bring him back. The river god, like they know, they've experienced that. Like that's part of their DNA at this point, and God's still trying to break them out of that. So he will continue to do that. And we'll continue on in verse 25, I think it is. Yeah. You shall serve the Lord your God. This is great. We're getting to a promise here. You shall serve the Lord your God, and he will bless your bread and your water, and I will take the sickness away from among you. None shall miscarry or be barren in your land. I will fulfill the number of your days. Now, we'll stop there for a second because I think we need to focus on something here. This is a particular promise for a particular time, for a particular people. I practiced that a lot in my head. That's great. Good. Yeah, all right. When we take verses like this, and people will do this, and they'll try and apply them to us now, and that causes damage, because this isn't a promise for us. And I know that because I've sat and listened to people who are very devoted, God-fearing people, missionaries to countries, and have heard their stories of like losing children, struggles with infertility, loved ones that have died earlier than they should have, or walking through sickness. I have a friend right now in New Jersey. He was a speaker at Camp Berea for years. Big guy, he's like 6'6". He's a baseball player, was a baseball player. Name's Tim Shorey. He's an author, really good guy, and he's walking through terminal bone cancer right now. He's one of the most godly men I know, and he's dealing with sickness. Because this verse is not for us. When he says, I will take away sickness away from among you, that's not a guarantee for us that if we follow God, we won't get sick. And so if anybody ever tells you that, like, you need to be like, well, no, that verse doesn't apply to me. That's a false gospel at that point. Following Jesus, you can ask the apostles who were murdered, doesn't guarantee your safety. Also, I know that because if you keep going in the next verse, people never claim this promise. He says in verse 27, I will send my terror before you and will throw into confusion all the people against whom you shall come, and I will make your enemies turn their backs to you. And I will send hornets before you, which shall drive out the Hivites and the Canaanites and the Hittites from before you. Anybody ever been looking for a house to buy, driven by one, be like, I like that one. Somebody lives there. All right, God, it's time to call down those hornets. Nobody claims that promise because it doesn't make sense. It's a particular promise for a particular time for particular people. The real estate market is crazy, though, so you can try it. And then God shows, I love God's planning in this. I mean, obviously God, like, he doesn't sit down there with a whiteboard and like map out like, all right, I'm going to do this. But his timing is perfect, and how he explains this, he doesn't need to explain this to them. He just doesn't need to. But he does. Where he says, I will not drive them out from you, or from before you in 1 year, lest the land become desolate and the wild beasts multiply against you. Little by little I'll drive them out from before you, until you have increased and possessed the land. So he understands. Like, I don't know if somebody had this concern in their mind of like, okay, well, if it's an empty land, there's going to be very, like, lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. Yes, thank you. How are we going to deal with that? And God says, no, I'm going to empty the land for you in perfect timing so that it's ready for you to take over. I have another passage I keep wanting to jump to, and I have to hold myself back. I'm sorry. I get excited. Anyway, so he keeps going. And I will set your border from the Red Sea to the Sea of the Philistines, and from the wilderness to the Euphrates. For I will give the inhabitants of the land into your hand, and you shall drive them out before you. You shall make no covenant with them and their gods. Again, no covenant with them and their gods. They shall not dwell in your land, lest they make you sin against me. For if you serve their gods, it will surely become a snare, or be a snare to you. He doubles down on this again. Don't worship their gods. It's not good for you. So, my big idea for today, that I'll get to now because I forgot about it. To fear the Lord and follow his commandments is always for our good. In contrast with verse 33, where he says, if you serve their gods, it will surely be a snare to you. That is not good. But to fear the Lord and follow his commandments is always for our good. That's why it's set up that way. Let's go really quick. Well, actually, no. Holding it back again. I wanted to do it. So we're going to jump to verse 24. Or not verse 24, chapter 24. Because we're in chapter 23, and it's the natural progression after that. Somebody seemed very surprised that 24 comes after 23. I'm sorry. That's a loud water bottle. Sorry. Anyway, chapter 24 and verse 1 says, Then he said to Moses, Come up to the Lord, you and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu and the 70 of the elders. I don't know if that's how you say it, but it sounds fun. Abihu. And 70 of the elders of Israel, and worship from afar. Moses alone shall come near to the Lord, but the others shall not come near, and the people shall not come up with him. So God gives instructions to Moses of what to do here. And then verse 3, Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the rules, and all the people answered him with one voice. And they said, All the words that the Lord has spoken, we will do. They are all in. They're like, yes, we got this. We can do this. It's going to be great. And Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord. That's a lot of writing. I don't know if you... Sometimes I get stuck on those types of verses about thinking about just how much writing went into that. If you go back, for the other chapters that we just read in the last couple weeks, there's a lot of writing there. That's not a... Sometimes I think, like, we read through this and we think it's like bam, 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 bam. But there was a break there somewhere where Moses had to sit down, probably for a while, and write this all down. Roses. His name's actually Moses. Sorry. Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord, and he rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain and 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. And he sent young men of the people of Israel who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of the oxen to the Lord. And Moses took half of the blood and put it in the basins, and half of the blood, and he threw it against the altar. And then he took the book of the covenant, and he read it in the hearing of the people. And they said, again, all that the Lord has spoken we will do, and we will be obedient. And Moses took the blood, and he threw it on the people. And he said, Behold, the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words. So I have to think, like, as I'm reading this, my first thought was, what about the guy not paying attention? Like, he's got his head down, he's drawing the sandal, adjusting a sandal or something, and then Moses is throwing blood everywhere. You stand up, you're like, oh, what is going on? Why is this happening? I hope he gave him warning, right? That's a lot of blood. But it's a picture of the covenant. Half the blood goes on the altar, and half the blood goes on the people. And one thing to think about as we consider that event, where they are, who they are, and what time they exist in the world. And so they're in the middle of the desert. They are, I don't know how many years from a shower, and they don't have more than really just the clothes on their backs. So how long does that blood stay with them that he just covered them? How is that a reminder of what just happened? Like, they have to live with that for, I don't know how long, but bloodstains are hard to get out of clothes, aren't they? He doesn't let them prepare for this. He just throws the blood on them. And that's a reminder to what they just covenanted to, that we will follow all of the statutes of the Lord. And for a while, that is a reminder to them. So there's a verse in here, verse 7, he says, Then he took the book of the covenant and he read it in the hearing of the people. That's a very long verse because there's a lot that goes into that. So we're going to flip really quickly. Oh, it's not going to be quick at all. Sorry, that was a lie. Deuteronomy chapter 6. If you didn't know this, Deuteronomy is just a few books past it. But there are parallel passages from Exodus to Deuteronomy, just kind of like how the Gospels have parallel passages. And this is one of those times. Deuteronomy chapter 6 is right after the Ten Commandments are given. And there's a lot more detail in what we're going to read about right here. There's a lot of reading. I'm hoping that this doesn't bore you. So just, if you get bored while I'm reading this, just stand up for a while, walk around, it's fine. Just stay engaged. It's going to be fine. All right, so chapter 6, we're going to start in verse 4. We're just going to read a small section, and then we'll talk about it, and then I'm going to jump around a bit. But I think this is important for us to hear. So this is Moses talking to the people in chapter 6, verse 4. He says, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and you shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates. I like this passage because if you put it in connection with the passage we just read, there's just a lot more emphasis on what Moses is saying. In Exodus, it's kind of like a summary, like a big view out of here. We just zoomed in to see exactly what Moses is saying here, and he's putting so much importance on what he's saying. He's like, the commands that I just gave you, the law, the instructions, you need to memorize these, and they need to be a huge part of your life. Don't forget them. He keeps going in verse 10. He says, and when the Lord your God brings you into the land that he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give you, with great and good cities, I like this part, that you did not build, houses full of all the good things that you did not fill, and cisterns that you did not dig, and vineyards and olive trees that you did not plant. And when you eat and are full, then take care lest you forget the Lord, who forgot you, or who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. It is the Lord your God you shall fear. Him you shall serve, and by his name you shall swear. You shall not go after other gods, the gods of the peoples who are around you. He keeps going with that. Again, it's very important. This is a central part, and I'm just going to keep trying to bring that up to us. You shall not go after other gods. If we flip over to chapter 6 and verse 25, he said, it will be righteousness for us if we are careful to do all this commandment before the Lord our God as he commanded. It's for our good. This is what we need to do. Be careful and do all his commandments. And then he, in chapter 7 is what we just read in Exodus chapter 23, kind of the parallel passage. I'm trying to figure out where to start here. Let's see, we'll start in verse 12. And because you listen to these rules and keep and do them, the Lord your God will keep with you the covenant and the steadfast love that he swore to your fathers. He will love you, bless you, and multiply you. He will also bless the fruit of your womb and the fruit of your ground, your grain and your wine and your oil, the increase of your herds, the young of your flock, in the land that he swore to your fathers to give you. You shall be blessed above all people. There shall not be a male or female barren among you or all your livestock. And the Lord will take away from you all sickness, and none of the evil diseases of Egypt which you knew he will inflict on you, but he will lay them on all who hate you. I think that phrasing is very important, by the way, how he says those diseases are going to go for those who hate you, not for those who you hate. I think that's interesting. And you shall consume all the peoples that the Lord your God will give over to you. You shall not pity them, neither shall you serve their gods, for that would be a snare to you. So that's just an expansive passage of what we just read, but again, the promises and what he tells them here makes perfect sense for their time and place, because what's God trying to do with his people? They're multiplying. Like he's growing a nation. And so it makes perfect sense for a nation that has to grow to not experience sickness or death or infertility or anything like that. He's building up his nation for himself. And he does all of that intentionally. And again, at the end of it, when he says, don't serve their gods, that's exactly what he means. Don't serve their gods. All right, so let's see. I think chapter 8 of Deuteronomy is the last section here in Deuteronomy I'll read. But he says, the whole commandment, verse 1, the whole commandment that I command you today, you shall be careful to do, that you may live and multiply and go in and possess the land that the Lord swore to give you to your fathers. So, I would encourage you, if you read through on your own time, Deuteronomy 6 through, say, 8, there's a lot of information in there. Actually, we'll read one more verse. Chapter 8, verse 20. It says, like the nations that the Lord makes to perish before you, you shall perish because you would not obey the voice of the Lord. That's a warning that if or verse 19, we'll back up a little bit. And if you forget the Lord your God and go after other gods and serve them and worship them, I solemnly warn you today that you shall surely perish. Like the nations the Lord makes to perish before you, you shall perish because you would not obey the voice of the Lord your God. And again, while he's telling them this, Moses tells the people all of this. This is all in his talk that he gives them before he throws blood on them, which is fun. And their response is, we will do this. Like they covenant with God, this is what we will do. And what's important to remember is this is a conditional promise by God. And so if we break the covenant, if we break the promises that God made to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, is I'm making a people out of your line. You are my people. You will always be my people. There's nothing that you can do that will separate me. Like I have chosen to bless you forever, right? But then there's these promises that God gives over here that are conditional promises that you will be blessed. I will drive out the nations in your way if you obey my commandments and don't serve other gods. And so it's a conditional promise over here. And so that's what the people have committed to. They have said, yes, we will do that. We see how you have protected us. We see how you have delivered us. We see your plan for us, and we are all in. We will do this forever. We've got this. All right, so how does it turn out? I think we need to explore that a little bit. But I want to point out one thing really quickly. There's another verse I forgot about. Deuteronomy 6, verse 20. When your son asks you in time to come, what is the meaning of the testimonies and the statutes and the rules that the Lord our God has commanded you? Anybody's kids ever asked them that, by the way? Why do we have rules? Like, what's the point of this? Then you shall say to your son, we were Pharaoh's slaves in Egypt, and the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand. And the Lord showed signs and wonders and great and grievous against Egypt and against Pharaoh and all his household before our eyes. He brought us out from there that he might bring us in and give us the land that he swore to give our fathers. And the Lord commanded us to do all these statutes, to fear the Lord our God, for our good always, that he might preserve us alive as we are to this day. That's our big idea, our good always. That's what God has in mind with his statutes and commandments. And so he says, this is a hypothetical situation, but he's like, when your son asks you this is what you tell him. So, let's jump over really quickly to Judges. Judges is an interesting book because I'm reading through the first couple chapters, and I don't think it's in chronological order. It seems like it jumps around a little bit and here and there. But basically what's happening in the first chapter of Judges is Joshua has died. Joshua is the leader of Israel after Moses, and he's gone. He has just died. And so the people are like, okay, what do we do here? They have come to the promised land. They're ready to go in. And in chapter 1, verse 27, I'm just going to jump down through these really quick. Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shean. Ephraim, in verse 29, did not drive out the Canaanites who lived in Gezer. Zebulun did not drive out the inhabitants of Kitron. Verse 31, Asher did not drive out the inhabitants of Akko. Asher, why'd you do that? Verse 33, Naphtali did not drive out the inhabitants of Bethshem. In verse 34, the Amorites pressed the people of Dan back into the hill country, for they did not allow them to come down to the plain. What happened here? Because there was a promise that the angel was going to go before and drive out the people. There were going to be hornets that drove out the people. So what happened? If you look in chapter 2, verse 1, it says, Now the angel of the Lord, remember that guy? Angel of the Lord? Went up from Gilgal to Bochum, and he said, I brought you up out of Egypt, and I brought you into the land that I swore to give your fathers. I said, I will never break my covenant with you, and you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of the land. You shall break down their altars, but you have not obeyed my voice. What is this that you have done? So now I say, I will not drive them out before you, but they shall become thorns in your sides, and their God shall be a snare to you. It says, as soon as the angel of the Lord spoke these words to all the people of Israel, they lifted up their voices and wept. And they called the name of the place Bochum, and they sacrificed there to the Lord. They broke their covenant, which is not that surprising. But why? Why did they break the covenant? Like, maybe there's more to the story here, and I think there is. If you read through Judges, it's not a very uplifting book. There's a lot of just really disturbing things that happen. But if you skip down to verse 2, or chapter 2, and verse 9, we'll go verse 8. It's in Joshua, the son of Nun, he had no dad apparently, the servant of the Lord died at the age of 110 years old, and they buried him within the boundaries of his inheritance in Timnath-Heres in the hill country of Ephraim, north of the mountain of Gash. And all that generation also were gathered to their fathers. This is the section right here. And there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel. This is not far after Moses. This is a close generation. It's not generations and generations, generations. This is Moses, Joshua, and then a generation rose up that didn't know what God had done in Egypt. How did they not know that? If you go back to Deuteronomy, chapter 6, these verses they mean more in that context, I think. In 6 verse 4, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I command you today, you shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house and when you walk by, or when you lie down and when you rise. Teach them to your children." And then, let's see, hold on. In chapter 6 and verse 2, we'll start in verse 1. "Now this is the commandment and the statutes and the rules that the Lord your God commanded me to teach you, that you may do them in the land which you are going over to possess it, that you may fear the Lord your God, you and your son and your son's sons, by keeping all his statutes and his commandments, which I commanded you all the days of your life, that your days may be long." The generational teaching, Moses tells them, you need to tell these to your kids in a way that makes them tell them to their kids and keep it going, because if you forget, that's breaking the covenant. And so there is a failure somewhere in here to complete that generational learning. And a pretty quick failure. Like a generation after, and they're like, what happened in Egypt? I don't remember. I wasn't there. I don't know what went on. So if you go in verse 11 of chapter 2 of Judges, back there, I'm going to help you flip back and forth a couple times. Verse 11 says, "And the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals," or false gods. "And they abandoned the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. They went after other gods from among the gods of the peoples who were around them, and they bowed down to them." It's exactly what Moses said not to do. It's exactly what the people of Israel said, we're not going to do that. We wouldn't do that. We've seen what God can do. We're not going to do that. It says, "And they provoked the Lord to anger. They abandoned the Lord and served the Baals, I don't know how to say it, and Asheroth. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he gave them over to the plunderers who plundered them. He sold them into the hand of the surrounding enemies, so they could no longer withstand their enemies. Whenever they marched out, the hand of the Lord was against them for harm, as the Lord had warned, and as the Lord had sworn to them, and they were in terrible distress." So if you go back to Deuteronomy again, we could do this all day. But in chapter 8 verse 20, or verse 19, "And if you forget the Lord your God and go after other gods and serve them and worship them, I solemnly warn you today that you shall surely perish. Like the nations the Lord makes to perish before you, you shall perish, because you would not obey the voice of the Lord." When it says that God warned them, he warned them. And if you keep going through the book of Judges, there's a phrase that keeps coming up over and over and over again. And that phrase is, "The people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord." And the cycle they get into is they get into trouble, God appoints a judge, the judge saves the people, the judge dies, the people rebel, and they forget God, and they keep going over and over again. And that phrase, they did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, keeps coming up and up and up and back. Back in Deuteronomy again, there's a verse. Chapter 6 and verse 18. And you shall do what is right and good in the sight of the Lord, that it may go well with you, and that you may go in and take possession of the good land that the Lord swore to give your fathers, by thrusting out all your enemies from before you, as the Lord has promised. Their command was do what is right and good in the sight of the Lord, and the theme in Judges is they've done what is evil in the sight of the Lord. And then at the end of Judges, the last verse of Judges is one of the most confronting verses in the Bible, I think. It's Judges chapter 21, verse 25. In those days there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So you've got the people of Israel doing evil in the sight of the Lord, as opposed to doing right and good in the sight of God. And they're doing what is right in their own eyes, instead of doing what is right in God's eyes. They've completely taken over God's role and made themselves gods. The pull, I think, a lot of times to worship false gods, where they see this false god as they can see, God has all these statutes and laws and rules over here. Maybe that God doesn't. Like, you can make your God, your false god, be who you want them to be, or do what you want them to do. And so a lot of the false gods are more appealing because you can manipulate them, but we don't worship a God that we can manipulate. We worship a God that we just follow because it's good for us. He's told us right up front, my commandments are good. If you follow these, it's going to go well. Not like, maybe like we just talked about, like it's not a guarantee of health or happiness or anything like that, but the eternal benefits from serving our God are unmatched. So I think there's this point that I want to make about something. What is it, Pat? You remember? No? Hold on. I know what it is. I'm going to tell you a story, and I'm going to close with that. I have a story and a challenge. And this story requires me to get a little bit vulnerable with you. So, don't judge me. Looking right at Jarius. When I was in high school, I got really into NASCAR. I watched a lot of NASCAR when I was in high school, middle school. And I don't think that actually describes exactly what I'm trying to say, but when I say that I watched it, I lived it. There's 43 drivers. I had memorized all the drivers, all their numbers of their cars, all their crew chiefs. I memorized the schedule. There's 36 races in a NASCAR schedule. I knew the schedule by heart. I could tell you that on June 12th, they would be racing at Pocono Raceway in Pennsylvania. And I knew the pit road speed limit for all the tracks. I lived in a small town. There wasn't a lot to do, okay? And then, so I, like I said, I immersed myself in this world. Had friends that did the same thing. We would, after church on Sundays, had a bunch of people come over. We'd watch the race and have lunch, and it was a good time. But it may have been unhealthy on some levels. And then in 2001, something happened in NASCAR, if you remember. Dale Earnhardt, who was one of the most popular drivers, died in a crash at Daytona 500. And I wasn't a Dale Earnhardt fan, but I was very connected to the sport. It was a one-sided connection. They didn't care about me at all, but it was fine. But that connection was very deep, to the point where 20-something years later, I will get literally emotional watching Dale Earnhardt Jr. win the Pepsi 400, which was the next race back at Daytona International Speedway after his dad had died. So I will watch that and him celebrating, and I will feel emotional watching that because I put so much time and energy and effort into that connection when I was young that it's lasted through all these years. That's, I think, the kind of effort Moses is telling the people of God to put into their relationship with God. Where he says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And then he says, you shall bind them as a sign in your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. Like they should be on your mind all the time. That's how I lived with NASCAR, unfortunately. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. You know how many posters I had on my wall of NASCAR? It was a lot. You know how many, I had a racing shirt for every day of the week I would wear, like a frontlet. Like it was, I had a constant reminder, and that's what Moses is saying. Like you should have a constant reminder of what God has done, what God is doing, and where God is bringing you. That should never not be in your mind. And the purpose for that is because you need to maintain that connection. Like if you don't put effort into this, if you just think it's something that's like, well, okay, it's an add-on to life, it's not enough to sustain your walk with God. It has to be a huge part of your life. It has to be on your mind all the time, which is hard to do. But I know, like, if I can do it with NASCAR, as a young person, like there are aspects of our life that we put a lot more energy and effort into than building our relationship with God. And if we could flip that, then I think that would be a huge benefit to us. The second part of that is if I show a video clip that makes me emotional, like I talked about, whether it's, well, you don't need to know. There's a bunch of them. Anyway, from the 2001 NASCAR season, there were a bunch of moments that were what they call healing moments on the track after the death of Dale Earnhardt. If I show those videos to my kids, they don't care. They don't. They have no connection to them. Do you know why? Because I haven't instructed them in that. I haven't sat them down and said, let me tell you the story about the Daytona 500. Let me tell you who Dale Earnhardt was. Let me tell you all of this story and the build-up and the emotional. They have no idea because I haven't instructed them. I haven't built that into their life. And so that emotional connection is not there. They have no interest in it. So if we, as the older generation, oh, I'm not older, Nancy's older. If I'm the more experienced generation of believers, doesn't sit down and instruct our kids, instruct the young people about the statutes and commandments of God, why are they going to care? I get the idea that's what happened to the Israelites is the older generation didn't sit down and say, this is how God has worked in our life. Let me tell you the story. They didn't care. It wasn't their story. If we make our story as believers the younger generation stories, that's what preserves the gospel and goes forward and forward and forward. That's how we advance the kingdom of God, is by sharing the message. And it's really easy to do if you have a family because it's right there. Like your kids are right there. They are supposed to listen to you. Like sometimes they're listening and you don't know it, right? If you don't, like we are the family of believers here, right? So just because maybe you're an older believer here that doesn't have young children in your home, you're not off the hook because there are a lot of young people running around these rooms that look up to you. And so you can grab a kid, well, not grab them, but you can try and stop a kid sometime. You can look for opportunities to share your faith and share the faith of the people around you with the younger generation. That's how the community believers are supposed to work. So I don't want to end up like the Israelites. I don't want the next generation after us to not have any idea of what God has done in our life. So my challenge is to look for the opportunities around us to advance the kingdom of God by sharing the story of what God has done in our own lives. That's all I got. I think, really quick, I'll do an announcement. If you have children in nursery, if you go get them before the baptism, that'd be awesome. Okay? That's all I got.
Thanks, James.
know a lot of you. Oh, here we go. I know a lot of you want to get into this pool, but you don't get the opportunity.